Welcome to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast, where we bring you the most interesting and enlightening conversations around movement practice and how you can become the most heroic version of yourself through pursuing movement that's relevant to your nature. This is a podcast that's going to feature some of the top movers in the world, some of the most amazing movement thinkers, and people from fields that are related to movement as far afield as evolutionary theory, strength and conditioning, and everything in between. So if you're interested in movement, please stick around. And if you like our work and want to support it, please consider supporting us on Patreon, because this podcast is completely listener supported. We don't want to take any advertising. We don't want to interrupt your experience of watching the show. So what really helps us get the best thinkers on, have the time to put these together, have the best quality for you guys as far as audio and video, is your support. So please consider supporting us and enjoy the rest of the show. Hey guys, welcome back to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. So it's been a little bit since we put an episode out. This is going to be kind of a one-off here, but we'll be getting back to regular episodes very soon. My guest this week is Aaron Cantor from Primal Practice, but actually I'm kind of his guest. He wanted to switch the roles up with me and interview me after he came to our most recent Return to the Source seminar. So that's what's going to be happening. Before we get to it, a couple things that we should talk about. One is we are in the middle of our beta debut for the online courses that we've been developing. It's going really well. We're getting amazing feedback from the students, and we will be debuting this online course more generally coming up in October. So if you're interested in having online support for natural parkour practice, this is going to be the course to look into, and keep your eyes peeled for that. You can definitely subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you're one of the first to be aware of it. In addition, like I said, Aaron just interviewed me at Return to the Source. That was our 7th annual Return to the Source. It was an incredible event. By all accounts, from the staff, from the students, from people who've been there for 4 years in a row, it was the best event that we'd ever put on. And I really think it was actually the debut of what you might call Evolve, Move, Play 4.0. And I'll probably kind of break down what that is in another episode. But basically it has to do with really refining the scope of a set of practices, right? What is the set of practices that best allows us to optimize the connections that we're looking for and that quest for meaning that we talk about? And then there's what is the way that we can practice that so that we can get better at the practices most effectively. And here's where we're looking into the stuff around ecological dynamics that you may have heard me discussing with some of the guests. And then the last part is, how do we generalize those skills most effectively to the rest of our life? And this is something that we learned a lot recently from working with Mark Walsh, who's been on the podcast. So this is this kind of coming together of how we describe all these things and really clarifying the why, the what, and the how of Evolve, Move, Play was really powerful. And it was just an amazing event. I'm really excited about it, and I'm really looking forward to what's coming up next, which is our autumn retreat. So if you're not aware, we're going to be teaching a 4-day seminar similar to Return to the Source, October 3rd through the 6th. We still have just a handful of tickets left for this if you're really keen on it. If you've seen John Vervaeke on the podcast, he's one of our most popular guests. He's actually going to be a guest there, which is extremely exciting, and that ability to have these dialogues around how we recognize what is relevant, how we cultivate wisdom, and how we develop the right ecologies of practice. It's going to be an incredible opportunity. So really excited about that. Follow the link down below to make sure that you get involved in the October retreat as soon as you can, because those tickets are likely to disappear really soon. We're cutting off sales September 13th. So that's something to know. So yeah, that's the news of what's going on with Evolve, Move, Play. Again, you can always support us via Patreon. Make sure you subscribe to the newsletter, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Without further ado, though, it's Rafe Kelly getting interviewed by Aaron Cantor on the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. Enjoy.
Well, one of the thoughts I had is we could just talk about Return to the Source. We just finished
absolutely.
This amazing experience. I was blown away by it. And I thought it would be cool to flip things around a little bit. I know in a lot of your podcasts, you're all constantly asking questions, and it's wonderful. Mm-hmm. But I would love to ask you questions and just kind of hear you talk and have a place to kind of showcase the very, very deep kind of cohesive thinking that you've done about movement and life.
Cool. So that's the plan.
Awesome.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So how'd you feel about this return to source?
Felt really good. Yeah. I mean, it was every year we feel like it's kind of the best that we've done. And once again, I felt like the best event we've put on. Really, the logistics were really smooth, and that's something that's, that's not my biggest strength. My strength is in the material. And so the younger coaches who we've got coming up really took on that role and made it run super smoothly, and kind of the emotional depth went to a new place as well, which was really fun.
Yeah, I was very surprised and very happy about that, about the amount of deep stuff that was coming up and people were processing and being held and supported. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like it happened in a very organic way.
Yeah.
People just stepped up to help other people deal with what was coming up. Yeah, it was quite wonderful.
Yeah. So, I was interested in kind of thinking about why that had worked out that way. It's something that I guess as the seminars have gotten longer, the group dynamic thing has become a more powerful element of the seminar. It's like you can't put people together doing really intense physical stuff for a week and not have a lot of bonding, and then that intimacy that people have is something they're missing in their lives. And that level of support and communication. And so it just sort of automatically allows them the space to sort of open themselves up more. But I think in particular this year, we took some technology that I had learned from my friend Mark Walsh on basically having people process their insights from drills that we were doing through the dialoguing, through meeting up one-on-one. And, in the past I'd sort of, I started with just having people train, and then I would kind of give them my take on it.
Yeah.
And then I realized that you really want them to sort of articulate it for themselves.
Yeah.
But when I started doing that, it's in a group. And so there's a couple problems with that. One is you got to ask the right questions. If you ask too broad of a question, then it's hard for people to generate something.
Right. And also there's fear, right? So usually the dominant voices dominate.
Yeah, the assertive voices.
Yeah, the assertive voices, the people who they tend to be a bunch of men who can articulate themselves and are happy doing that. Yeah. So I think breaking up into groups and having that dialogue and processing happening is awesome.
Yeah, and I think as well, some of the life-linking ideas and questions that weren't exactly from Mark, but were really inspired by how he did that. And I think that made a huge difference, being able to just really specifically say, where is this coming on in your life? Where are these patterns at? Mm-hmm. How do you feel about this aspect of it? And getting those questions a lot tighter. I think it really allowed people to kind of start farming their own insights much more powerfully.
Yeah. I know in my own work, I've found that sentence stems and good questions after an immediate experience can actually take the lesson of an experience and make it real and tangible and transferable, versus I just had this experience and then it kind of dissolved into the sea of experiences that I'm constantly.
Yeah. We want to be able to make these things permanent. We want to take the profoundness of an experience and sort of get it to articulate and be sort of well organized in the mind so that we can continue to use it.
And there is something too, as a teacher, I know I've struggled with allowing people in my classes to articulate things, maybe not as well as I think I'm articulating them, but allowing them to come up with the insights versus giving them the insight.
Yeah.
And I think it's a tough thing to do, but when we can do that, it really creates a space where people feel like they're actually, what they said is theirs versus they're not quoting Rafe anymore. This insight is mine.
Yeah. A question I was asking myself a lot during the seminar is, have I said enough? Do I need to say more, or do I just need to leave space for other people to say?
Yeah.
And also, if someone was sort of partway to saying it the way that I would say it, did it really need to be that final polish that I would have given it, or was it better for them to have their piece and sort of work on it?
Right. Even if it's rough hued and whatever, it's theirs.
Yeah. And so that was a really interesting thing. And I found that compared to previous years, I did substantially less lecturing and just a lot less kind of talking on my own, a lot more listening. And it was really interesting to see how, like, I'm not 100% sure exactly what people took away from this because a lot of it happened kind of invisibly to me. It was in the dialogues in between people.
Right.
But what I could see was the level of depth that they were receiving and the openness and some of the movement that came out towards the end of the seminar as well. Whereas, like, one of the big realizations I've had kind of recently is just how deep the emotional regulation layer is actually, how relevant it is to movement competence.
Absolutely.
It's like we start playing with these mindfulness ideas and we're trying to transfer from a movement practice into our life. And someone who's just interested in the movement, they might be saying, oh, like, you know, I just want to be able to do cool stuff better. But if you can regulate yourself into a place of confidence and happiness and joy and flow, you're going to be so much better able to try out the skills.
Yeah. So
often what holds you back from a skill isn't anything technical or physical. It's psychological and emotional.
Totally.
And so when we get better at that, it has this enormous impact. And so I think that's what we saw, you know, what we have been seeing over the last few years, but especially this year, towards the end of the seminar, you saw people have this really profound ability to kind of tap into their own flow state and their group flow state. And then we saw just some crazy things happening.
Yeah. I mean, the last day of the seminar was my best day.
Yeah.
And I was tired and exhausted, and we had this party before, you know, so I hadn't slept, but it was amazing. Like, the stuff I found myself doing, it was the first time I actually felt flow.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that had to do with sinking into the group, opening myself up, finding my place in that group, kind of being okay with limitations. Like, there was a lot that happened that I think was non-physical. Yeah. Like, physically, maybe I should have been performing less well. And, you know,
but you're free.
I was free. A lot of people were like, God damn, Aaron, you're a fast old man. You know?
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah, you were throwing down in the woods.
I really was. And I was super impressed by you. Because I've seen videos. Yeah. And I've seen you do some stuff in places that weren't ideal. You know, like when we were in Massachusetts, like there weren't a lot of great places for you to showcase your abilities. But damn, you're really good at this. And that's one of the things, like when we've talked, like I'm always impressed by the depth of your thought and how many sources you draw from and how you can articulate these many streams into, like, this is why moving is meaningful. Yeah. But then to see on top of that, like, and God, like, I don't know, moving in nature, the way you move is so much more complex than moving in a predictable environment. Or it's predictable to some extent, but, you know, the amount of slippage, the amount of moss, the amount of bark that can rip off, the amount of injury that can happen when you fall down into a canyon, right? I was really impressed.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is it's there's more variables, right? It's like when you're running on like, you know, if we look at the jump that we did over the canyon that you just mentioned, it's like, you know, usually in a city, you just have a flat run up with relatively simple footwork. But we're running down a slope. We're running over, like, there's little plants and stuff sticking up, and there's little bumps on the slope.
Yeah. Little rocks that you could trip on, or rocks that if you jump off of can roll and you don't get as much power as you think. Yeah.
And so getting your footwork right is so tremendously challenging. And, you know, these things, it's like you can't capture really what that is on video. Right. You just see that, you know, a lot of the resolution of what's happening when you're moving in nature disappears.
Right.
So, which is a challenge when we're filming it, because it's like everyone has the expectations from urban parkour, like how big things are and how far you can fly. But it is harder to find jumps where you can fly like that in nature.
It's way harder. Yeah. And to me, very, very rewarding. I mean, I think urban parkour is rewarding as well, but something about that extra variable or that extra layer of having to just really pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's one of the triggers of the flow state is a rich environment, right? And if you look at other flow state sports like whitewater kayaking, surfing, snowboarding, most of them are really oriented towards nature because that's where we're going to be experiencing sort of the richest environments, the most information the nervous system has to adapt to. And that really does trigger that flow state. And it's tremendous. The other thing I like about training nature is, if you run across that flat surface, you're getting kind of a specific type of loading on your body. When you run across the broken terrain of nature, you're getting a much broader set of loading patterns through your body. And that's actually going to make you more adaptive, but also it's going to allow you to stay healthier because you're not overloading any specific tissues as much.
Right. Yeah, it actually taps into your body's redundancy, right? There's many, many ways to do this. And you're getting, you're actually triggering all those ways.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about why. Like, why do you do what you do?
Yeah.
Why is there such a need, or why do you think there's such a need for conscious natural movement, physical training, positive physical interaction?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that in general, as a society, we are suffering from, what you might call a meaning crisis. John Vervaeke, one of my big influences, this has this idea that we need to awaken from the meaning crisis.
Yeah.
And this is obviously something you see in the work of other thinkers like Jordan Peterson or Jordan Hall or various people. Another way to look at this is that most people feel a sense of being disconnected or alienated from something in their life. And just sort of naturally through parkour, I found something that gave me a sense of meaning, that gave me a sense of connection. And as I moved into training in nature, I noticed that deep sense of connection to nature, which was really valuable to me. And I think that lots of people have recognized this within flow sports, that it affords us that. Like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi has talked about the idea that people who are in flow states more often report the highest sense of well-being. So that's been around for a while, but I guess that when I kind of hit my 30s or late 20s, suffered a lot of injuries and was sort of looking at, like, what does the long term of this practice look like, right? Is this something that I'm going to have to be done with in a few years because my body just can't sustain it anymore? Like, I know a lot of people in the parkour community now who, sprained an ankle one too many times, tweaked it back one too many times, and it's just like they just can't trust their bodies.
Right.
And they're not going back to it.
That was a stage of my life. When I was young, I did this.
Yeah. And so there was something about what I was getting out of my movement practice that I didn't want to have to let go of. And so I started really thinking about why practice this. And actually not long after that, I started practicing at heights, which I'd never really done before. And I was, taking risks with my life around the same time that I was having my first child. And I was like, I really had to think about, what is this all about? And I remember, this quote I saw from the mountaineering community. It's not what the man does to the mountain. It's what the mountain does to the man.
Right.
And that really captured it for me. It was like, what matters to us in the long run has to be more about how our practice changes who we are as a person than what we achieve in our practice.
Yep.
And if you take that, then even when you reach this point where you're not going to jump a bigger jump, you can still continue to harvest value from your practice, can still continue to challenge yourself in unique ways, still continue to grow and see new elements of the practice as you age. And so that was kind of the beginning of that rabbit hole. And I was starting to articulate all these ideas around, that movement practice was really a tool for self-cultivation. That was the ultimate purpose of it. Because fundamentally, most of us don't have the need to use these skills in our day-to-day life, or they're hardly the most pragmatic skills to invest ourselves
in. It's wonderful to think that if there was a baby in a burning building, you could run in there, rescue it, backflip out of it. But
you're probably better off learning coding.
Right, exactly.
Right? save some money for yourself by learning how to be a mechanic on your own car. Or,
Totally.
Any of those things. So I had that idea of, okay, let's orient this practice towards self-cultivation. And that was around the time that I started picking up Jordan Peterson's work and really recognizing this idea of meaning. And I started to realize that what Peterson described as is sort of the heroic quest of the individual who proactively confronts the dragon. And that's the archetypal person is the person who can go out into the undifferentiated chaos of potential and extract something good out of it.
Right.
And to me, it was like, well, that's exactly what we're doing when we're jumping. Mm-hmm. Right? When we're doing a movement practice, we're going out into some space that's just beyond the edge of our understanding. That's just beyond the edge of our competency. And we're somehow becoming more masterful within ourselves through that practice. And so, the dragon is this new jump, and the gold that you get from it is the character you develop.
And I mean, as you're saying that, I'm also thinking there's tyrannical order that we're combating as well. There's this tyrannical kind of like stay within the lines, read the signs, and definitely don't climb up onto the roof, and definitely don't jump over the alleyway. And that there's a kind of order that you're breaking.
Yeah, I just started thinking about this recently, actually. We talked about this at the seminar, but there's a relatively new realization for me. I'm not sure, but I think I may have sort of started to think about this when I was talking to Thomas Koutich, who's one of the kind of first or second generation parkour athlete in France before the internet generation.
Okay.
One of the direct students of David Bell.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the experience of these guys who had started the parkour movement and how they had really had traumatic upbringings, a lot of them, and they were going out and finding this heroic quest that they could take on. And so in some ways you could see it as that confrontation with the dragon. But there's this other aspect of the archetypal hero, which is the person who brings the waters of life back to the parched kingdom.
Yeah, big time.
The parched kingdom is the kingdom that has become too ordered, that has become too tyrannical in we all have to do everything the same way.
Right. This is how you exercise. Do it on a treadmill inside. And if you want competitiveness, it shows up in sport, within the bounds of this field.
Yeah. So we live in as we walk through the city, we live in an environment that has been ordered for us very, very carefully in a lot of ways. And we've stripped away a tremendous amount of chaos and potential in the environment. And so, one of the really interesting things about parkour is like all kids will climb trees and jump and vault around in the natural environment. But a lot of times it seems like they don't see their urban environment the same way. Right. So parkour was like this radical reimagining of the city as being available for play.
Yep.
In the same way that we all inherently as children can interact with nature.
Right.
And so that to me is like bringing the waters of life back into the parched kingdom. The kingdom of the city was renewed through
reimagining of the landscape. Yeah.
And we could say this, skateboarders had already done that. And, it's not unique to the parkour community, but it was a really beautiful example of that same kind of archetype.
Yeah. And what's interesting too, is that something born in the city, something born in the parched kingdom can also come back to nature.
Yeah.
And bring life back to nature. Because one of the things I think we're all suffering from is a sense of alienation from our natural environment.
Absolutely.
And without touching it, without actually interacting with moss and grass and rocks and rivers, they're just pretty things that are very abstract, To actually play in nature gives us a love of nature and a relationship to it that I think is very, very important.
Yeah. This is a thought that's been inspired for me recently by John Vervaeke. We're talking about this idea that, I guess I've thought about this, conceptualized this as my connection to nature is more alive than someone who maybe just looks at nature, just walks through nature.
Right.
And that's kind of an implicit way of describing it. Last year, one of our students said that having come to one of my seminars was like having been to a beach to walk and then getting to go surfing for the first time.
Right.
And how all these layers of meaning were unlocked. And recently, Vervaeke's been describing this in a really beautiful way, where he talks about this process of realization, making something real. So as you interact with something, it actually becomes more real to you because you experience more of the layers of what it is.
Yeah,
and things are actually incredibly complex. So you can look at a tree and you can think, it's a tree, right? Or you can start climbing in the tree and you realize all of the unique spaces available to your body in that tree. And you realize the texture, what is it like to have the perspective of the tree, not of the person looking at it from outside the tree.
Yeah.
But the perspective of somebody who is inside the tree, relying on this tree to keep them alive.
Yeah.
To have the participatory knowledge of what it is like to continually move with that tree.
Yep.
And that's that. And the central idea there is that once I had that's a relationship, right? It's like falling in love between two people is like the process of reciprocally realizing each other, like making each other real, exploring the facets, revealing all these things to each other. And so when I'm engaging with nature in that way, truly realizing it, truly revealing myself through the process of engaging with it, and also making it real to me, I fall in love with nature. Nature becomes so much more meaningful. The connection is so much deeper. And I think that we've made a mistake with our environmentalist movement where we've viewed humans as so
basically cancerous.
Yeah.
Cancerous. The best thing you can do in nature is kill yourself.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Don't have babies and
yeah. Don't have babies and die.
Yeah. And so we desperately want to create stewards for nature, but we tell people, they can't ever walk off the path. They can't ever engage with it. They can't ever be part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very hard to get people to be deeply motivated about something like that.
Right.
If you're, imagine that, how motivated are you going to be to sort of give charity to a child who you see a picture of versus one who you see in church every week.
Right. And to that point, it's interesting that a lot of the money that comes for conservation efforts come from hunters.
Yep.
I think 90% of it comes from hunters, right?
Yep.
People who are actually in there love it. Want to preserve it.
Yeah. Surfers are very, very, like surfers get mad when you mess up their spots.
Right.
And they will advocate. They will fight real hard about, an oil refinery going in near a spot that's important or something like that. So, if we want people who care deeply about the trees, maybe let them climb a tree every once in a while.
Yeah. Encourage it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, meaning crisis. It's one of the reasons you do what you do. The how is really encouraging people to get in there. And there's a few other practices that you're kind of pulling together as well. And I mean, the way I've been thinking of Evolve, Move, Play, I don't know how you think of it, but I think of it almost as a school rather than a system. Because a school can hold many different opinions and many different practices and yet be a cohesive entity.
Yeah. It's an interesting distinction. I mean, a system in some way kind of ties into this idea that, there's something highly specific and logical and ordered, which there is elements of, but there's also this necessity for openness.
Yeah.
And one thing that, I've seen happen a lot within the fitness industry is this tendency for the kind of the sacralization of the founder of something.
Right.
And then their thoughts are sort of permanently etched, and everyone has to just sort of read from the book of whomever it is. Whereas the way I like to think about Evolve, Move, Play is a set of ideas that I've had the privilege to help give birth to, but that my own mind is never going to be sufficient to fully serve. And so the goal is to create a community of people who accept the central ideas and then can explore them and network them between each other so that we can all grow together. So yes, a school. That's a good way of it.
Yeah, I really like it. It makes a lot of sense to me. And one of the things that's I think of this idea of being aligned beyond agreement. Having a a destination and not knowing exactly what the best way to get there is, but being willing to try and being willing to see other people trying and learning from that. Mm-hmm. I really like how you're bringing in a lot of the somatic practices as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just to kind of go back for a second, to connect to the somatics. Yeah. So we talked about the why, right? We said essentially it's this quest for meaning, which we can also look at as character development or self-transcendent practices. And then our little kind of niche within that, because there's lots of ways that you can achieve that, is in that connection between body, mind, and environment.
Right.
And then, our how we get there. So we can look at it as kind of the benefits that people get out of the practice, which is like a reconnection to the self and play, and a reconnection to their bodies and to nature and to a sense of tribal connection.
Yeah, to others for sure.
Yeah. And then kind of the specific features that we use, or the specific methods that we use, are mindfulness practices, meditation, contemplation, what I call body practices, which are how we take care of the body. Right. Learning to make sure all the joints function well and the whole system communicates and you have enough strength.
Yeah. Nancy Stark-Smith, who's a beautiful improvisational dancer, talks about solo practices. Yeah. There's solo practices and partner practices. Yeah. And I think these are just caring for self.
Yes, caring for the self, right? And then, and it's interesting because you can almost there's almost a space in between those that you could look at as like somatics or embodiment. Mm-hmm. I think embodiment and somatics generally lives in this space between mindfulness and body. Because like we could look at the body as object and do something like bodybuilding. Right. And that can be very beneficial to us, right? We can gain a lot from a practice like that, but it's treating the body as an object, right? And we can do mindfulness practices like concentration practice that are very disembodying. They take us out of the body.
Totally.
But then we have practices that bring the mind into the body and make the way that we experience the body more aware.
Yep.
And more capable of being regulated. And so that's an area of my work that I think, so Mark Walsh, who I mentioned earlier, he's kind of one of the big leaders in the body and community, and he's a good friend of mine, so we talk a lot about this stuff. And, he would say that stuff was very implicit in my work before I ever encountered the world of embodiment, but I've gained a lot of understanding through interacting with that community now.
Yeah.
And I really like, Mark's sort of thing of, you're looking at how do you become aware of your psycho-emotional states? How do you learn to regulate them? How do you do that in your own person? And then how do you do that in relationship to the broader social environment? And then you could look at any movement practice and sort of ask, how do we get the benefits of it out into that broader sphere, the relational and social aspect? So that's kind of the embodiment piece, the somatics piece. And then we look at kind of body and environment practices. Or maybe we could look at the embodiment in some senses sort of overlying all of these.
Yeah, it seems to hold all of it. I always thought of embodiment or articulated as being and becoming.
Yeah.
There's the being side, which is just tuning into what's happening right now, and becoming like, what do I want to actually embody? What skills would I like to have, and how do I get from here to there?
Yeah.
Without losing the reality of like, this is actually where I am and I have to be okay with it.
Yeah. We talked about that.
So it seems like,
when I interviewed you that was the first time I'd heard, kind of seen the language used that way. And I just immediately worked very well for what we were talking about. But I think it's such an interesting balance because I see practices like somatic practices like Feldenkrais or Tai Chi Chuan, and I think that they can fall into this trap of internal recursion, or
it's a self-referential vortex where you get better at it to get better at it to get better at it. I mean, that was why I pulled out of yoga, because yoga made me better at yoga at a certain point.
Yeah,
and it didn't really translate into anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, people talk about meditation as a sort of panacea,
right?
But I think that on all of these paths, that any path that's sort of singular, especially, has a set of traps.
Yep.
And so the trap of the internal practices to me is is becoming so focused on the internal experience that you're not cultivating your agency to actually go out in the world and become something else.
Actually change your environment.
Yes. Right. And then the flip side is you can go in the external environment and to me, internal is being, right? And external focus is becoming.
Yeah.
And if you're focused on that external thing, the goal is always on the horizon,
right? Which
is very motivating and very good for long-term kind of well-being to a certain degree.
But it can be exhausting, and you can break yourself too.
Exactly. You can end up so focused on where you're going that you're not attuning at all into how it's impacting you now.
Yeah.
And that can actually take you out of those flow states, which are really where you're trying to get.
Right. It's conducive to well-being and to and to development.
So I'm trying to find this, ecology of practices that helps kind of avoid these negatives, right?
Yeah.
Right. So,
so in this return to source, we did some meditation.
Mm-hmm.
We did some wonderful stuff with Rob.
Yeah.
Like a lot of martial art drills.
Yeah.
I know you've brought that in before too. We did great wilderness stuff with Kyle.
Yeah.
A bunch of self-care that was drawing from a bunch of sources, right?
Yeah.
Joint mobility, fighting monkey style drills.
Yeah.
Parkour in nature, lots of storytelling, time around the fire, eating good food, processing emotional stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other sources that you draw from or practices that you think are interesting that you would like to incorporate in future events?
Sure. So I guess I'll go back and sort of lay out that whole what the features of what we do are.
That's right. Yeah.
So we have the mindfulness practices, the body practices, then body environment, which is how we interact with the kind of fixed external world.
Yep.
And then you have like body and object, which is the things that you can move around and manipulate.
Yep. Sticks, rocks.
Yeah. So, what we've been doing a lot is games with balls and sticks, right? So a lot of like learning to swing and avoid a stick or a practice ball, learning to catch and throw and juggle. And then we have the body-to-body practices.
Yep.
And those
can be cooperative or adversarial, right? Combative.
Yeah. And so I've been doing martial arts since I was 6 years old. And I really love to kickbox and do MMA, and I train jiu-jitsu, and I've reached a pretty good level in those things. Certainly not a specialist, but yeah, I can hold my own pretty well against most people. And so I'm very interested in those, and the contact aids, kind of the way we use contact is really interesting in how that it creates this rapport and this ability to connect and use communication that is really profound, actually, from a self-cultivation perspective and from an emotional regulation perspective. Like, there's a lot of the embodiment stuff we can get there in a very interesting way.
Totally. Very quickly. Give people a vocabulary, and then they can start having conversations they've never had before, making distinctions they've never made, but through touch.
Yeah. And people are desperately craving that kind of touch and physical intensity and complexity that comes through these practices. And then we kind of bridge those through games that are partially competitive to games that are very competitive but limited, so they're very safe.
Yeah.
And then over time we can start freeing the limitations, the control of the athletes and the technique of the athletes develops. Yeah. And so what we found there is that we get rid of so many obstacles that people get tripped up on in the pathway to having success as a martial artist, where so often people...
By playing these games.
Yeah. So often people get injured, get scared, get overly aggressive because they didn't get some of these building blocks in place that, in a healthy culture, I believe would be developed through kind of just rough and tumble play as children, but that we're not getting access to anymore. And so we're rebuilding that for people. So that's, the body-to-body stuff that we do. And then the last thing I've kind of thought of is the element of craft, which is where the physical skill meets some sort of pragmatic output. Yeah. Right.
So you can build a house, carve.
Yeah. Juggling.
Yeah.
It's great for your general self-development, but it's not a practical skill unless you become a professional juggler, which is most of us aren't going to go there. On the other hand, being able to do some basic construction will save you a lot of money in your life.
Right. Totally.
So there's, so there's this huge set of skills that we could participate in that we could pull from.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Can you break that down again?
So it's basically, you can view it as kind of like increasing layers, but it's basically starts with mindfulness, then there's body practices, and there's body environment practices, body to body practices, body to object practices, body to body practices, and then crafts.
Yeah.
And so we have the craft of wilderness skill, which is what we share in our workshops on top of these other things. But something like cooking, something like
it's another craft, painting, sculpting,
singing.
Yeah.
We did a lot of singing, a lot of musical stuff, which is really cool.
That was fun.
So we have, that's kind of the overarching stuff. And, with the mindfulness right now, we're using a combination of concentration meditations, which come from the yogic tradition, as far as I understand it. I learned them from Simon Thakur, not from direct yogic experience. And then body scans, and then metta meditation or loving kindness meditations.
Yeah, and I think you can find concentration practices, body scans in many different traditions, from shamanic traditions to like yogic, Buddhist, tantric, Taoist, Kashmir Shaivism.
Yeah. So I'm also really interested in studying some of the kind of internal alchemy stuff from Taoism. I'm interested in studying. I've actually used some of that a little bit, even though I'm not very knowledgeable about it. But I had some serious gut issues, some IBS issues. And I was able to essentially meditate on slowing down the peristalsis in my gut and dramatically decrease my symptoms.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's kind of an internal alchemy thing. And then I really am also interested in some of the Stoic meditation. So these are like practices that...
like death meditations.
Death meditations and negative meditations. I did a death meditation recently with Mark, and that was very profound for me. But, those are things that I guess we're experimenting with that we're not yet prepared to bring to our students. And then with the body practices, we have a lot of joint integrity stuff. We don't teach it at the workshops because there's lots of widely available stuff out there. Mm-hmm. But, I have a background studying lots of different strength and conditioning methods. And we have some very specific ideas around the optimal use of strength and conditioning to support natural movement practices. And we're all that's an area that I'm particularly diving into right now, studying.
And there's going to be some online courses around that pretty soon too.
Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're going to come out with a course we're calling Elastic Strength.
Nice.
The idea is what we see with parkour athletes that so many people who come from a strength training background don't have is elasticity. But
springy.
Yeah, we need to be springy. But a lot of parkour athletes could use a little bit more specific strength work. And then the athletes who are coming to us from the strength training world, the fitness world, we need to get them that elasticity and help them balance their strength profiles. Because a lot of times the way their strength has been developed has not been very balanced in their body. So that's, I'd say, an area we're doing research in. And then within the kind of body environment stuff. So that could, we can talk about parkour there. We can talk about natural parkour. We could also look at something like gymnastics, like Floreo work from Capoeira, like track and field. And all these could be areas that you could research. Myself, there's a huge focus in the culture on movement on flat ground. And I just don't find that very interesting. Not at this point in my training. It has uses. It's really nice for people. People have lots of access to flat ground. Right. It's easy for them to adopt practices that involve finding a flat space. Right. It's harder for them to sort of map what they might be doing to what I'm doing if their tree looks totally different from the trees that I'm playing. So there is some benefit, and we do have ground flow practices in our online courses, but we're not kind of looking to take that to the highest level, right? And be the guys who are the best at teaching people
It's more like it serves a purpose. Like, and the context is move better, body to body, move better in nature.
Yeah.
And develop yourself.
Yeah.
Versus get as good as possible at spinning on your head and doing whatever.
Yeah. So for me, most of the research, the stuff that we're interested in is stuff like, specific types of trees that you can move on that we haven't been able to go as deep into. Like, how do you move between different vertical trunks really well?
Yeah.
And move quickly and powerfully and elegantly in that situation, or more time on rocks and understanding kind of the dynamics of what needs to be taught in that situation. But we're also, I often go back to sort of track and field as a source for understanding, and then on the acrobatic side, we also look at capoeira and gymnastics to try to more deeply understand how we get athletes to acquire the right skills and then be able to use them in the context that we want. Mm-hmm. Even something like team sports, something that's very interesting to me right now.
Yeah.
You see,
both my kids are deeply into soccer, loving it. And at first I was like, this is a military industrial whatever invention, but I see the value of it, the cooperative. So much cooperation, so much communication. And a tremendous amount of intelligence is developed through it as well.
Mm-hmm. Recently this is sort of more specific and technical, but recently I've been really interested in the understanding that's coming out of like basketball players in how to set up a really powerful vertical jumping, from a run up, and realizing that a lot of the same principles actually apply to vaults and flips in parkour, and like just taking bits and pieces from that.
Right.
So we have this really interesting sort of scale that we're trying to continually research at all these different levels that go from, archetypal storytelling and the questions of meaning and problem formation and cognitive science to skill acquisition for a front flip.
Yep.
And then how to connect these levels at
from meta to very, very specific.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. So you mentioned John Vervaeke, Jordan Peterson, Jordan Hall. Who are some other people who have really influenced you in your thinking about all of this?
Yeah, Jordan.
These guys aren't movers; they're thinkers.
Yeah. Jordan Hall is someone who I've actually just started looking into. I was just mentioning him as someone in the realm of the thinking, but as far as meaning, my big influences are Peterson and Vervaeke.
Okay.
But
we're both in the same university.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
And we're gonna have Vervaeke at our next workshop.
That's cool. Amazing. The retreat. When is that?
That is October 3rd through the 6th.
Cool. I hope I can come to that.
Yeah.
I want to just sit by the fire with him.
Yeah, it's gonna
see what happens.
So I guess at the big level, I think of this thing as the problem of complexity, right? We live in a world where there's just way more complexity than we could ever understand.
Yeah.
And somehow we have to navigate through that and live lives that are meaningful to us.
Right.
And I think those two thinkers have sort of articulated that as well as it has been. But I find that their themes are really resonant in the work of some other thinkers who are really very valuable in my thinking. John Boyd, who's a military strategist.
Okay.
He developed something called the understanding of the UDA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act.
Okay.
So in kind of any...
And it's a loop. It's a cycle, right?
You're always going through this process, right? Because once you've acted, you need to observe what's happening.
Yeah.
And so he has a beautiful description of the problem of complexity because he basically points to Gödel's incompleteness theorem, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and I believe it's the second law of entropy. I can never get that straight, which is which. But
essentially all of those are like, there's always going to be an element that you don't know or an assumption that is unfounded.
Yeah.
You have to make an assumption that has no proof.
Yeah. So Gödel's incompleteness theorem is basically the principle that there's always axioms within any system of thought that cannot be proven from within the system of thought. And that I'm pretty sure there's almost no debate about this. About that at this point.
Yeah.
Heisenberg uncertainty principle is really specific to you cannot observe both the position and velocity of subatomic particles
at the same time.
Yeah. You only get to have one. But it shows you that there are things about reality that you can never understand
from a
all the
particular
aspects
perspective.
of.
Yeah.
And the second principle of entropy is that basically information is destroyed every time that something changes form.
Uh-huh.
So that's the second law of thermodynamics is entropy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're thinking about your plan for something, you have to recognize that the plan is not perfectly logical because it's reliant on some axioms that are not there.
Yep.
That there are things that you can't observe that are, or can't completely understand all of the elements of. And that as soon as you set it in place, parts of it are starting to break down. Uh-huh. So you're always operating under this problem of uncertainty.
Yep.
Nassim Taleb, whose public persona I hate, but his books are wonderful.
Yeah.
His whole series of books is called Incerto.
Okay.
And basically what he talks a lot about is we become anti-fragile through exposure to stress. And in order to understand anything, you have to skim the game. You have to put yourself in a position to actually benefit or fail by doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's very resonant with the heroic principle as described by Peterson. All of these thinkers are essentially kind of getting to that.
It's participatory engagement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Embodied learning versus...
We can't know everything through logic and knowledge.
Yeah.
We have to have experience. We have to go out and do things.
So one of the themes just on that we talked a lot about was algorithmic thinking versus heuristics.
Yeah.
And the problems in both of those.
And
I think that's a really cool way to think about movement, right?
Yeah, so that's something I got directly from Vervaeke, though I've encountered a similar conceptualization through my friend Todd Hargrove, who talked about complex versus complicated problems.
Okay.
But the basic idea here is if you can, within a problem, you have, how does this start? You have to get from your starting state to your end state, obeying a set of path constraints.
Mm-hmm.
If you can understand all of the potential pathways, all of the potential options, then you have a well-defined problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't, then you have an ill-defined problem.
And most movement problems are ill-defined problems.
Yeah. So within cognitive, this is something that comes out of, I believe, the work of Newell and Simon. But basically, they define that problem formation, and what that generates for you is a search space for a problem solution. Right? So if you're trying to bring your hand to your mouth, mm-hmm. you have a search space of potential ways of bringing your hand to your mouth.
Right. All these ways. Okay. Yeah.
So then you have to, and somehow you have to select one from the one. Mm-hmm. The problem is that you have the potential for what they call combinatorial explosion when there are too many options within the search space. Mm-hmm. So the example that Vervaeke gives, which is great, is chess. Okay, so when you play chess, you have 30 potential legal moves generally per turn, and you have 60 turns. So you have 30 to the 60 potential pathways to victory.
That's a big number.
Apparently that's like more than the number of like atoms in the universe. Wow. Or something like that. So it's an enormously large number.
Okay.
So you don't have the computational power to search all that space. Right. So if you have a problem that you can search all of the space for, then you apply an algorithm and you get a precisely correct. An algorithm is a precisely correct answer. Yeah. So 3 times 3 is an algorithmic answer, right?
Yeah.
Logic is algorithmic. Deductive logic is algorithmic, right? If the premises are true, the conclusion must be true.
Must be true. Yeah.
But we actually, the vast majority of problems we face have search spaces that are too large for us to.
That would be an ill-defined problem.
That's an ill-defined problem.
Yeah.
And so almost everything we do in movement is an ill-defined problem.
Yeah.
If you think chess is complex, think about playing basketball.
Yeah.
Think about doing parkour or running through the forest, and realize that that your body has all of these redundant systems that allow you to do the same thing, but now you have to search within those what's the optimum at any time. Mm-hmm. So this is a problem that was identified by a thinker, Nikolai Bernstein, who's a huge figure, titanic figure within motor learning theory. But he found that he described something called the degrees of freedom problem, which is essentially, if you look at flexing your elbow, you have 7 muscles that cross the elbow.
Yep.
And then if you put the 7 muscles here plus the muscles
and then you turn the radius, and they all know which. Yeah.
You rapidly run into a combinatorial explosion problem. So he identified that. So in the past, prior to him, and still many people think about motor learning as a program that's played out through your brain. Right? It's like when you're learning to shoot a basketball, it's like you're building this pattern. But how you do that in that search space is really complicated. And then he also identified something called context conditioned variability. So if I'm in one position and my weight is transferring at a specific speed, the same muscle activation that would result in a successful shot in a different circumstance no longer does. Right? And so my body has to have ways of searching that space that are sufficiently correct, because it can never get to perfectly correct.
Has to be good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we have, the other side of the algorithm is the heuristic. So a heuristic is something that basically prejudges the search space and eliminates vast parts of it as irrelevant.
So for chess, that would be something like control the center of the board versus always move this way.
Yeah. So, So so 3 heuristics from chess are control the center of the board, get your queen out early, and castle your king. Right. So those are prejudices. Those are you've prejudged that these are going to get you to the solution. Yep. Someone who is a good chess player can recognize your prejudices, your biases, and play a game
exploit them.
That exploits them. So you have this central problem that the very things that make you adaptable and able to respond to this complex world are also the things that can lead you into self-deception and illusion.
That's where John Revecki talks about bullshitting yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Bullshitting yourself. And so in order to have success in life as a human being, in order to cultivate wisdom, in order to, avoid crises, we have to have these systems of sort of self-cultivation, self-transcendence that allow us to become wiser, right? So for Revecki, intelligence isn't sort of just knowledge or ability to apply logic. It's the ability to recognize what is relevant. And then, or you could say rational knowledge is, or intelligence might be your ability to sort of solve a problem. Rationality is your ability to recognize the right problems to solve.
Yeah, because to a certain extent, that's what postmodernism did. Nothing matters.
Yeah.
There's an infinite amount of meanings that we can kind of pull out of like this thing we call life.
Yeah.
But there aren't an infinite amount of meanings that lead to the best possible outcome for everybody. So what do we want to focus on? Yeah,
precisely. So we have this, it's such an interesting idea. Like, how do we, essentially what we need is to cultivate wisdom or pathways to the good. And that alone is a very difficult problem. Like, what is it to do good? And, and that's such an interesting challenge for us to be thinking about at the level of like movement practice. But I fundamentally actually think that this is maybe one of the most powerful pathways that we could take to cultivating people who are able to actualize that, because the hero is the person who is able to proactively take action in the world. But if you're not, if you don't have developed embodied understanding of what it means to take action, to take the jump, to push through something, to deal with hardship, it's just not there's nothing that's going to make that as relevant to you as a practice that allows you to experience it in the most complete way. Right? Dealing with like a chess game, right? You can be afraid in chess to deal with somebody. Right. It's not a physical fear in the same way as fighting somebody. Right. The same way as jumping.
Yeah.
And so in the same way that the tree became real to us through realizing it through physical touch and through a process that allows us to change over time and interaction with that tree.
Because everything we touch becomes a part of us to a certain extent, not a part of us physically, but a part of our neural mapping of the world.
Yeah. It changes you. You carry it with you.
You have a richer map of reality now. Yeah.
And so I think that when we've fallen into this Cartesian duality where we view the self as sort of contained within the mind, and the body is just a taxi that moves us around.
Yeah.
And this isn't to blame that necessarily on Descartes.
Right.
His thought was more sophisticated than that, but that's what that's the message that we've taken from it.
Yeah, there's the mind, and then there's the flesh wagon.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's really just not that simple. Your brain is continuous with the body, and the brain itself evolved to control a body. And so when we can extract these lessons of wisdom and rationality through a process that involves the body, I believe that they're going to be more deeply embodied. Yeah. And will allow us to more effectively utilize them in the world.
Now I got one for you. What do you reckon happens when you die?
That's beyond my ken. I mean, I guess that I am non-theistic. I have no the systems of thought that I have really invested in. Yeah, they don't seem to be able to access anything useful for that question. I'm not saying that those systems are. In the past, I would have just said that was the sum of our ability to know, and that certainly we were just going to rot in the ground afterwards. Right. Currently, I'm much more convinced by this idea that there's a whole lot of stuff that we can't know, and so I've gone from being a hardline atheist to an agnostic atheist, where I don't believe that God exists, but I also don't believe that I could know whether that question is true. Right. And I would say that I'm almost at this point more of a non-theist in that it's not even that I disbelieve that God exists as, I guess I don't know what to think about that. Yeah. I don't know what to think about the afterlife. Right.
And the only reason I'm asking is because I think it does tie into the question of meaning in a very big way. It's not a popular question. It's kind of an unsophisticated question in many senses, or many circles of thought. But it's a question that is deep. Yeah. Like, what the fuck are we doing here? And like, what's life about?
Well, I think it is really related to what we're talking about in a sort of interesting way, because it's essentially, the argument Vervaeke makes is we went through these self-transcendent processes and realized that there was something beyond our own experience. And one way that we conceptualized that and we built our sort of technologies of self-transcendence was through this model of two worlds. Plato's cave, right? Yeah. There's the higher realm, and then there's the shadows that are reflecting the fire of the higher realm. Yeah. And what we are is those shadows. And heaven and hell, and this there's this whole era of the Axial Revolution when all of our kind of major religions were founded and philosophical schools were founded. And so we've been living in this two worlds mythology for a very long time. And in Vervaeke's lecture series, he basically tracks it to Thomas Aquinas, who, when faced with the fact that the Christianity that had been developed over the last 1,200 years was not really congruent with Aristotelian science. When Aristotelian science came back to Europe, what he did was he tried to bring these things into coherence by splitting the world between an objective world of facts where science worked and a world of faith. Right. And faith was a thing that we willed, right? We had to will our belief. And so and what we've done, even before that, was essentially we have invested the sense of meaning in that higher world. And then, for many of us, that belief in the higher world has collapsed. And so we've been trained by Neoplatonism and trained by Christianity for, 1,000 years or more, 1,500 years, whatever, whenever you make the break.
The sacred is something you have to believe in. Right.
And it's something that is external to the world. Mm-hmm. And so this is something that came up in our debate between Vervaeke and Peterson. So this is one of the key pieces of Nietzsche's thought, was that we had to reclaim the body. We had to reclaim experience as sacred.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And this is, and so for me, my relationship to nature and the way that I interact with nature is where I find the sacred in my life. Uh-huh. And that it's sacred because it's extremely deeply meaningful to me, and it affords self-transformation. Mm-hmm. And that's sufficient for me.
Yeah, it's a non-theistic sacredness.
Yeah.
Right? Which doesn't exclude the possibility of theism.
No, it doesn't.
Right.
I mean,
it's just,
maybe I'm worshiping Hanuman and I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Embodying Hanuman.
Yeah, totally. Those big leaps.
Yeah. So that's kind of, my thoughts around that area.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I really enjoyed Return to the Source. It was awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to do it again for sure.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to it.
Yeah, it's an amazing experience. And, just being invited into your backyard, essentially, mm-hmm. not your backyard, but your home state, the place you grew up.
You also were in my backyard.
I was in your backyard as well. But really, the place you grew up, the place you spent so much time, kind of like the landscape here is amazing. And it's very, very cool to be able to participate in it. 6,000
feet up, looking at an 11,000 foot peak one day, and in glacial lakes, and then swimming on beautiful sandstone boulders all around you. It's pretty sweet here.
Yeah, having world-renowned Wim Hof instructors, helping you breathe, and then going into these ice baths. It's incredible.
Thank you very much.
And I don't know how many of your listeners know about your dad, but that place is incredible too. Sunray Kelly's Ranch or whatever.
Yeah, the Sunray Shire.
The Sunray Shire is awesome.
It's a pretty unique space. And it's been...
There is something about just not seeing straight lines, even in buildings, that was just so refreshing.
Yeah.
And coming back into Seattle, coming back into the world of signs and letters, and it felt a little bit of an affront, because the way he's built those buildings is just like, they're just continuations of the natural surroundings. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's interesting. Every year I go there, I think I get a deeper appreciation for the place.
Right.
Because, whatever you grow up with, you kind of view as normal.
Totally. Not only normal, but sometimes abhorrent, something you want to get subnormal or non-optimal, or something you want to get away from.
And there's lots of technical problems with the way that my dad builds, as far as we had leaks, and the heating wasn't very good. So he's gotten a lot better at that.
Yeah.
His houses now are really good as far as heat. But every year I get to see it through the eyes of all these people.
Yeah.
And realize how it connects with my work and that sense of re-enchantment in a way.
Yeah.
Right. One of my good friends in this world, Dave Wardman, talks a lot about re-enchanting the world. And I think that there's something about the combination of the movement, of the mindfulness, of the nature, and of that particular space that we teach at, having people come to my father's property, that it's this real deep experience of sort of re-enchantment.
Yeah. You're back in Middle Earth. It's incredible.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of like it's like getting to go through the Fellowship of the Rings for yourself, or whatever, because you're climbing the mountains and you're having epic adventures and you're doing fighting stuff, and then you get to go back to the Rivendell to
hang out with all the hobbits and feast.
Feast. Yeah. And so it's just been interesting to start to realize just how uniquely special that is, and how much we want to make that the center of what we're doing, and how we spread it out.
Yeah.
So
what's interesting too is it kind of relates a little bit to an archetypal story of bringing life back, father culture.
Yeah.
And pushing away from father culture and then actually returning to it.
Yeah.
You know, and you shared something like that around the campfire, which I found very, very powerful. I don't think this is the best place for it, but
yeah, but it's a very interesting thing for me because, like, you know, I think of my father's generation, especially the counterculture. I mean, that's from the counterculture. You know, they saw their culture certainly as being the parched kingdom.
Yeah.
Right? And they wanted to bring something new back to it. They wanted to reimagine, bring freedom back. And I think they went too far. I think that they lost
destroyed structure and meaning.
Yeah. And they lost sight of so much that was of value in the culture that had preceded them. And so a lot of my journey, let's say, has been like having grown up as a hippie kid and then starting to recognizing the value of the historical Western culture. So that's like going back and reviving the bones of my father culture. But then there's this interesting recursion to that, which is like how much of the stuff that I got from my dad and his generation is actually really good. And I've rejected too much of that and have to go back and bring that back as well. And so there's like this very global level of confronting our relationship with the culture that brought us into being and bringing what's good out of it. And thinking about that, say, as Western culture, even, you know, we're inheritors in many ways now of world culture, right? Because, you know, we could be looking at Taoism and Buddhism as part of in some sense, part of our cultural inheritance.
And no matter where we come from, we actually probably have a few generations of people who have been multicultural.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Heidegger and Nietzsche were influenced by Buddhist thought.
Yep.
So that those things are layered into Western culture now too. But yeah, so we have that, and then we have kind of the local, which is, you know, what is the culture of my own family. And just on the last night, actually, that we were talking about festivals. And I noticed how reactive I was up against like these things, like how like I just want to dismiss, you know, Burning Man and York Country Fair.
Right.
And I was just noticing that like I have a real strong desire to view those things as just for their pathologies.
Yep.
And not like as expressions of this thing that we are seeking in the very work that I do of, you know, community, what, you know, like Jamie Wheel and Stephen Collier talk about communitas and ecstasis and catharsis as these central states that human beings have to go to engage in self-transcendence. It's like, well, that's what Burning Man is. That's what a festival is.
And it affords the space for self-organization, and it affords the space for all sorts of learning that doesn't occur in formal ways.
Yeah. There's something about, you know, they're playing with the right stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
There's something about those festivals that to me doesn't get there.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something about not being oriented around practices. And I think that's hopefully what we're really solving with events like Return to the Sources. You know, we got the communitas, right? We got the ecstasis, we got the catharsis in that container. But then we had a lot more time to integrate it, a lot more time to get tight with with the specific people. And then at the end of it, we were starting about how do we reintegrate this? How do we take this forward? And it's looped into practices, very specific, physical, manifest, concrete practices that people can do.
Right. So what's your hope for Return to the Source? What do you envision? What would you like to manifest and create?
Yeah. You know,
Return to the Source, Evolve Move Play, your company.
Yeah. So the next things is, you know, I want that event to be the heart of what we do. And I want to essentially get to the point where we have a culture, a curated culture of amazing people, you know, independent researchers in meaning in some sense, who are there, you know, 4 times a year. Right. So we have a fall retreat and a winter retreat, a spring retreat, and Return to the Source in the summer. And we just sort of are able to continue the tribe engaging this process together. And then we build online courses that allow people to maintain those practices throughout the year and support them in online communities. And then from the online communities, we build real communities. So
local communities outside of Washington, all over the world.
So we start having coaches, not just here in Washington, but all over the world. And we start having events like this that are popping up that are achieving the same type of effects. So already in the UK, my friend Ben Metter runs Move with the Seasons workshops, and he runs a week-long workshop called Wildwoods, which is in many ways similar to Return to the Source. And so if folks are in Europe and can't make it all the way over here to Return to the Source, highly recommend that. And I'd like to see that become a thing that can happen 4 times a year as well, and can be expanded and be a week long, and start budding off teachers who can facilitate this kind of ecology of practices going forward. And then I guess the other aspect of that is I want to continue to be able to collaborate and to work with other teachers whose work aligns with us, and get even stronger and better collaboration with Simon Thacker and John Vervaeke and Fighting Monkey and Dave Wardman and Mark Walsh and all these people. So that's kind of the vision for where we're going.
Yeah, great. Awesome, Rafe. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron.
It's been really awesome spending this week with you too.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. If you want to support what we're doing, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notifications button so you know what's coming up. And of course, the biggest support you can give is to become a Patreon supporter. This is what's going to allow us to grow this platform more than anything else. So this is entirely listener supported, and we really appreciate your support. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.